Right, we'll move on to the planning application. The first one tonight is in relation to Blakelands, Yeoman's Drive. We'd like to ask our Service Director to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. This site, Blakelands, members are very familiar with. We've had numerous discussions and applications that have come before members on this site. This application here before members is the application that came to committee in November, where members gave a resolution to approve the application subject to a revocation order. So that meant that the original permission, that was the flawed permission without all the conditions, would then sort of disappear, so it would be revoked and no longer take effect, and then that would be replaced by the new permission in November with all the conditions. The applicant refused to sign the Section 106 that was part of that application and was not prepared to support that after committee. So we have been working with the applicant to try again to recover the position on Blakelands, and members will be aware of the 102 order that we commenced. Also, residents near the site have mounted their own out-of-time JR, and members are aware that that was something we have been considering as officers, but of course residents have gone ahead with that. The reason this is before members tonight is that the applicant a few weeks ago has decided to agree to this current application whilst they're not prepared to have a Section 106 with a revocation order, and they are prepared to, and they have submitted a unilateral undertaking, so it's an obligation that they will not implement the first original permission, and it will be replaced by this permission which will have all the conditions on. So effectively the unilateral undertaking will do very similar to a revocation order. So members, we therefore suggest that you support this application tonight, because this then resolves the difficult position we're in terms of the missing conditions, which protects the neighbours' amenities, and it takes us back to January 2018 when the original application was approved, and it was thought that the conditions were on, and clearly they were not. So it takes us back to that position and recovers all the conditions that were missing off the permission. There is also, just to say, an amendment to the lighting conditions. So we've had a late representation on the lighting, the wording of the lighting condition, and we've got a change to that. So it was a condition that had been a compliance condition, so therefore it wasn't included in its full form on this application. However, there is an issue about some distances and looks levels, and so we're going to reinstate what was the original lighting condition back on the application if members are minded to approve it tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We do have some speakers, but just before we invite them to come down, members will have read the papers, and there are two recommendations in the report tonight. My proposal is that we have one debate and then we will vote on them individually. So be minded when you do speak that you will have one chance to speak on this matter, and then we'll have two votes after that has taken place. So can I invite Mr. or Mrs. S. Hussey, Ms. Fernandez to come forward to the objectors' seats over here. Councillor Staver, if you want to come down and sit alongside, there is no right to reply, you can move the chair across to there, David. You have up to 3 minutes each, gentlemen, and I will give you a warning about 30 seconds before your time's up. And be grateful if you can introduce yourself, and if you're representing any group or just if you're a householder in the area. I know David's from the Parish Council. I don't mind who goes first.
I will, if you don't mind, Chair. Simon Hussey, resident parish of Blakelands, representing myself. Before I start, Chair, a point of order, if I may, on the recommendations. I just wanted to point out that we intend, myself and my neighbours intend to address recommendation B, with no comment on recommendation A, which I believe can be adequately decided by members of the committee, and who, in any case, may be informed in this regard by our comments in relation to recommendation B, plus I only have 3 minutes. Is that in order? Okay. Ostensibly, this application seeks to address the missing conditions from the original approval and thus protect the immunity of the residents, but we must be careful in considering the potential impacts of an approval to this application. We believe the grant of permission contains an important condition restricting operational hours, and whilst it's not perfect, it is arguably the most important condition of all. It cannot now be appealed against the original permission's time has elapsed. But if this application is approved today, all conditions attached are once again open to appeal. We do know that this applicant is not a good neighbour, and we are certain that at least this condition will be appealed given the opportunity. The process was after all started against the original permission. We know from the additional papers narrative that that is an option. So let's be clear, we must do nothing to endanger this important condition. This must be our red line and our backstop, and in order to protect it, we must therefore reject this application in favour of the original permission with all its flaws. And to continue, the granting of the original permission as material in this application may move some to consider a rejection as perverse. But rest assured, however, there is case law to support such a position. In Chisholm versus London Borough of Richmond, Mr. Justice Newman finds the principle is straightforward enough, that in the planning process, the previous history in connection with the site, including decisions with the site, are material considerations, but anybody having any power to reach a decision in connection with the site at a subsequent date has a discretion. This discretion must be exercised in accordance with their own judgment.
30 seconds, sir.
The requirement for consistency does not mean that they must be slaves to the previous decision and are in any sense bound by it, or must therefore come to the same conclusion. Their judgment and discretion is informed but not fettered by the history. In summary, I'd make this final point. It would indeed be ironic if, in seeking to implement those conditions which sought to protect the community of residents blighted by this development, we undermine that which goes the furthest in doing so. Dare I say, unforgivable in light of what we know and believe, so please reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fernandez.
John Fernandez, resident Telford Way, objecting the application. I'd just like to say, being a resident of Milton Keynes, how let down I feel as a resident by this whole application. I know in hindsight that a few of the councillors felt that they would have probably come to a different conclusion had they been in this position today. Right throughout this whole process, we have trusted the professionals to make judgments and decisions based on your expertise, and that's what we've gone with up till now. We've had residents who built scale models which no one had a look at, which has been more representative to what we're living under right now. And I just wanted to appeal to you guys to not just put this through because you feel it's too late, but to actually do what is morally right now. When you guys go home tonight, you don't have to live under what we do. We left with this, and what we need is to be protected as much as we possibly can, and that's by rejecting this application, and we can maybe look at other avenues after that, but that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. David, you've got up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. In May 2017, DCC made a reluctant decision to approve this horrible development, but made a bold decision to add a condition to give some relief to Blakelands residents by restricting continuous HGV operations proposed for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The developer appealed this condition, but then withdrew the challenge. Even though the decision notice of January 2018 omitted 11 conditions agreed by DCC and construction had begun, Blakelands residents knew that they had some protection from the noise and disturbance of 24/7 HGV operations. Officers tried, unsuccessfully, to rectify the error by seeking the developer's agreement to reinstate the missing condition, and also serve as Section 102 order to add a condition limiting the use of the external lighting to HGV operating hours only. The current application includes some of the missing conditions and, importantly, still limits HGV operating hours, but it does not limit the operation of external lighting suggested in the Section 102 order. So who benefits if this application is approved? The developer has a new permission, including limited HGV operations. But as your solicitor has confirmed, this can be challenged by an appeal by the developer. The council overcomes errors made by officers, but there is no additional benefit at all to Blakelands residents. There's no restrictions on lighting are included. Indeed, I would argue that by approving the application, it is very probable that the developer will appeal the 24/7 HGV operating conditions and has an extremely reasonable chance of succeeding. This would leave Blakelands residents worse off than they are now, tonight. Is DCC prepared to make another controversial decision which would make the present imperfect situation worse? The only sensible and brave decision is for DCC to independently exercise their judgment and discretion, as per the High Court Chisholm London Borough Richmond ruling, disregard the recommendation and refuse the application. In the certain knowledge that 24/7 HG operating hours are restricted for the sole benefit of Blakelands residents and cannot be overturned by an appeal. Please refuse this application. For clarity, refuse recommendation B. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we don't have the person exercising the right to reply, can I ask Tracy and as me to comment on anything that's been said by the objectors?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, to say that the point that's been raised about so if members were minded to refuse this application, it would keep intact the 24/7 hour condition for lorry movements. I think we need to really be careful about what that actually does in terms of where it takes us back to. So yes, tonight, if members were minded to approve this application, it would put all the conditions back intact, and yes, the applicant can appeal. And the applicant can appeal the 24/7. They can appeal all the conditions, and that's fact, and we can't do anything to prevent that. If the application were refused tonight, then the applicant would revert back to the original permission. The original permission has the 24/7, and at the moment that cannot be appealed. But if the out of time JR were to be successful, what that would do would be to quash the original permission, and then we would be required to reinstate a further permission with all the conditions on, and then the applicant can then appeal. So actually, we are not in a worse position. In fact, actually, this is a helpful position we're in tonight, and therefore I would encourage members to support the recommendation.
Do you have any comment to make on the points of law that Mr. Hussey mentioned, the cases?
No, Chair, except I would say that an original planning permission is a material planning consideration, and it is something that members can take into account.
Thank you. The way we do debates on planning applications in this council is that I will propose the officer recommendation or recommendations in this case. One of the vice chairs will then second that. Doesn't mean that either of us is going to vote in favour of the recommendation, but that opens up the matter for debate by the members of the committee. So I will propose the officer recommendations for this item, and Rex, please go to second them. Who would like to open the matter? Councillor Bint. 4 minutes.
Thank you, Claire. Can I just
Not Mayor, Chair.
take a couple of minutes on this, because I'd like to come back again later if I may. It seems to me that we've got a bizarre situation that if we do nothing tonight, we have a planning application in force, that we regret it being there, but it is there, and the hours, the restricted hours are beyond being appealed. They're there. The building is there and it's being misused, it's ugly, but it's being JR'd. The residents may succeed in their JR and they may get permission overturned, and we're back to square one. I recall this was a very narrow decision, and since then some councillors have said if they knew how big the building was going to be, they would have supported it. Some of them don't believe that it should have been granted on the basis of being out of keeping. If we grant permission, then the JR could succeed and the building could then be vulnerable to being removed, except that tonight we give that building a fresh life if we grant as recommended. So, on the one hand, we're taking a decision about the future of the building. We are destroying the residents' hope of getting it removed. On the other hand, we're putting some new conditions in, which may make them better, but the position is horrible. Can I ask why we are doing this now when we have an investigation in process that will help us understand why we got here and to what extent, if any, this committee was not as completely informed as it should have been at the time? And we know the JR is going forward, which had that JR been determined, we would at least know where we are tonight. So why are we in this position tonight? How have we got to this position to have this decision in front of us before those two things have happened? And hopefully I've got some more members to come back later.
Who would like to answer that, ladies?
Thank you, Chair. Just without going into the merits of the JR, as per the update paper, the JR is currently on hold until the 16th of April, and the High Court has agreed to hold it pending the outcome of this DCC tonight. What the JR requests is not the removal of the building, that there isn't a prospect of the building being removed through the JR. The JR, if successful, if leave of jail is allowed, would be to quash the original planning commission with the missing conditions, so the original decision notice, but to then reinstate the decision notice with all of the missing conditions. So the position we should have been in, had the missing conditions, the decision notice with the missing conditions had not been issued. So it would be to correct the position as opposed to quash the original commission in its entirety and remove the building, and it would remove the building.
Do you wish to respond, John?
I think that's helpful, and I think in terms of our trade-offs tonight, if there is no prospect of the building being removed as a result of that JR, and I know that's something that some residents were hoping for, and those of us who believe that the committee was not as comprehensive and accurately informed as it should have been, were hoping that that was an outcome. But if that isn't an outcome, I think that is helpfully clear at this stage, and at least we know where we are. Can I just have again the explanation? I don't think that covered the point about why are we doing this tonight before coming to the end of the internal investigation.
Thank you. Yeah. Tracy.
Because this is seen to resolve the situation we're in, the applicant has put the offer there that they're prepared to do a unilateral undertaking, and as officers we felt it important to get the conditions intact as quickly as possible.
And you're assuring us that that unilateral undertaking is as binding as a rescinding of the original condition?
So the wording of the unilateral undertaking is in the update papers, and what it states is from the date of the planning commission, if this is issued, that the let me just get the exact wording out. is binding, and it's legally binding, and they wouldn't be able to continue development in accordance with the original planning permission, and they would have to give written notification to the council of when they have implemented the new permission. The permission is granted, so then therefore there would be no confusion as to which permission was implemented and which conditions we could enforce. So that written notification would enable us to take enforcement action if necessary on the conditions recommended before members today. So yes, it is legally binding.
Andrew.
Thank you. I think the questions that John has asked, I was getting somewhat confused with his interjection because I was at the belief, as Naz has just outlined very graphically, that any JR, being successful or not, was not going to see the removal of the building. There was nothing currently in the pipeline that could see the removal of the building. I was one of the members that John has referred to that has openly admitted that I made the decision to put my hand up in favour of this nearly 2 years ago, and it was one of the mistakes I've made in the many number of meetings I sat on DCC. I think where I do agree with John, the point that John got absolutely right, is the timing of this tonight is, I'll call it unfortunate, not anything else. Whilst it does indeed kind of nullify the need for the JR, and potentially save residents and everybody a lot of expense, because if this is granted tonight, it seems to get to the point where the JR actually was trying to get us. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, Tim, not so I don't think I am. It also comes at a time where an investigation into quite how we got to even granting this, never mind granting it without conditions and everything else, actually happened and took place. And much of what I might want to say tonight, I'm not going to be able to say, because I think with an investigation going on, I ought to say it to an investigator first, before I say it publicly, which I think leaves us in a bit of a difficult position. You see, if I thought there was any chance whatsoever of getting rid of this building by voting against this application tonight, I would do it. And that's exactly where I would be. But I'm put in a position where, for the second time, I've got to put my hand up by the look to be in favour of this application, simply to get us to a position of getting the best protections we can in place for it. So having voted for it once, and regretted it ever since, I've now got to put my hand up in favour of it again, simply to try and get the conditions that I didn't get the first time. I have to say, Chairman, it sickens me to the core that I've got to do it, but I think I've got no other choice.
Thank you, Andrew. I very much appreciate your honesty there. Next, and then Charlie.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as my two colleagues have outlined, we are between a rock and a hard place tonight. On the one hand, in an ideal world, we'd refuse this and hope we could take the building down, but you've heard the advice. That isn't probably with our gift, and the JR probably won't see that come around either. So, to my mind, our duty now is to the residents of Blakelands, unless McCall can help us way, and to try and get the best protection we can for them from the original. I hear the argument there's a risk around the 24 hours of going to appeal, but my understanding, I know the applicant hasn't been exactly helpful to us in this process, is then that certainly isn't something that's been intimated in conversations with officers all the way through this process. So my mindset comes back to protection. We had these conditions, unfortunately missed off on the decision notice. It has jeopardised the amenity and protection of local residents, and to my mind, to make, if we want the best of a bad job, we need to put the protection back in and make the life more bearable for the residents who are going to have to live with this on a daily basis. So, as Andrew said, I was actually one who actually voted against the original permission, I seem to recall. I'm probably going to come down in favour of this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, mate. Charlie.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to the rest of this and their contributions. It's helped clarify what I would have asked. I think I understand the crux of the decision. It's either continue as is with one protection, firm and secure, or grant new permission with all protections, but with the risk of appeal. I think is the decision we have to make. So I have a question then, or I suppose two. The officers, which is in relation to the applicant. So, who made us a bit bad name at this point in time. Question one is, why have they unilaterally undertaken this given the history of not acting in such good faith? And related, what do you assess the likelihood of them lodging an immediate appeal to a newly granted planning permission?
Thank you.
We're not clear why they've changed their mind at this point. We could guess it might be that they have a potential occupier of the building that can live with the conditions, and then there isn't a problem, so that sort of falls away. It could be that whilst all these issues are hanging over the building, they're finding it difficult to let the building. So it could be one of those two things. We're not clear, and they haven't shared it with us because, you know, we're not in sort of regular dialogue, I'm afraid, anymore with them.
I think there's a lot of summarisation we could all make as to what their reasoning is, Charlie, and they don't have to declare it, so they're doing to read what's on the table. Rob?
I think I very much just want to echo what's probably already been said very clearly and graphically. As Councillor here has already said that it seems we're stuck between the devil and the DCC here, and given that we've received confirmation that whatever decision we might take this evening, we can't get rid of that building, which I think we've all recognised is not a very good one, is going to cause substantial harm locally, because I think we need to move forward and try to moderate this position. It seems to me that the risk is small that the applicant would attempt to appeal the conditions. I'm assuming, and this is the question I'd like to ask Tracy, that like any appeal, it's for the council to choose whether to fight that appeal or not. If they were to choose to try to appeal that 24/7 condition, and am I right in assuming, Tracy, given that the Deputy Chief Executive is here and the Chief Executive of the Council at this time, we might need to specifically fight that appeal to make sure that it's not appealed?
Yes, we will. And we did when they appealed first time round. I'm sure we've got an army of residents that want to assist in that as well. So I think we will be putting up obviously a robust and strong case. And we think we will have a very strong and robust case against 24-hour operation on the site. So.
Thank you for that. I think that one of the comments is the fact that when at the introduction time we saw 3 senior officers who are not members of the planning team here. Michael and Paul came to previous meetings and witnessed the discussions that we had. So at the highest level of this council, I think it's fair for me to say that there is a commitment that we're going to try and do the best to mitigate situations that we're in now. Any other comments? Terry?
Thank you, Chair. The cynic in me tells me that the reason they want this underlying way of doing it is the fact that they know they can appeal. And I'm not convinced that they wouldn't get through on some of the conditions at appeal. They see this council as being weak, which at times over with this we have been weak, we haven't known what to do. And that's why the cynic in me tells me that's why they want to go this way down the track. And they will appeal. And that's worrying to me.
Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I'm obviously in a very difficult position being ward councillor for this ward, but I do feel very strongly that we should do everything we possibly can do to protect the interests of these good people. 2 things that really worry me. One is the fact that